All right, here we go. We're going to start delving into manifesting. In other words, creating the reality that you want, creating that paradigm that you want, and having it reflect in the world around you. This is really what manifesting is, or creating. So let's take a moment to think logically here. If I cannot create something within myself, a personality, or change a personality within myself, how am I going to change my reality around me? How am I going to change my world? I believe it's not a great stretch of the imagination to believe that it's easier to change something within ourselves than to change in the world around us. And this kind of gives you a little bit of a clue as to how difficult. I mean, it is possible, it can be done, and there are people all over the world that can do it. But when we look at our own personality and our own reactions, we think, okay, this is unchangeable, this is uncontrollable. Imagine if you cannot control that, how are you going to control the world around you? So we're going to start by taking the first step. So a little background. Many years ago, like many of you, I started to have my eyes open to a wider world by studying ESP. And I came across a book. It was by Jane Roberts. It was called Psychic Politics. Jane Roberts was the author of Seth Speaks, if anybody's familiar with that. Really interesting books. Really, really interesting. She was a big thing at her time. Kind of almost the Edgar Casey of, the 80s or 90s. And this particular book dealt with archetypes and personality aspects. We're going to start by talking about archetypes. And you're going to say, okay, I know about that, but you do not understand how important they are. Nothing in this world is created without a mold. Nothing can be created. We have to have the creative principle, and we have to have the receptive principle. And to get a better idea of that, let's take a look at an atom. Remember, everything in this world works with this formula. We have a nucleus, which is the receptive principle. Then we have the electrons, which are the active principle, or the creative principle. It is the mold of the receptive principle that holds the creative principle. It just expands from there. Remember, I talked about dependent arising. One thing is dependent upon another, which is dependent upon another. The archetypes cover all of the possible personality aspects that you can have. It is the mold that we create our personality from, which is customizable, and I'm going to get into that. So, if you want to get a better idea of what personality aspects are, or what the molds are, you can take a look at astrology. Astrology has a personality and an emotion assigned to each individual planet. It's the same concept of the gods of the past. Every god of the main god had a different area that it covered, or a different paradigm, or, again, to say it was a mold for a drama that we could live out. You can also take a look at stories. One of the easiest one to look at is myths. You know, the myth of Hercules, the trials that he went through. Google those. You're going to find those extremely informative. And I don't see a need to go through that in this video when it's just so easy to search out. Really, I would highly recommend doing a search on myths. Now, in a minute, I'm going to explain how you created your personality. Believe it or not, it is a creation of yourself. While personality aspects and emotions can work independently, and often do, of each other, they generally are tied together. So, let's work backwards, and then I'm going to discuss again how you created them. Personality aspects are created by situations, by experiences. So let's take a look at two of the broadest categories that you could use for a personality aspect, and then we're going to work our way back. When you go to work, you move into a whole different personality aspect as you have as the family person. Most everybody has a family of one sort or another, but if you don't, imagine back when you were a child. That was your family or child personality. When you left the family, when you left the home, and let's say you had a part-time job and you went to the part-time job, you had a worker personality, which would be dependent upon what kind of work that you did. Let's look at those as two separate extremes. Think of a personality aspect as a program. So you have the main program, which would be the worker. Tied to that main program would be subroutines, which generally have emotions attached to it or different ways, programmings, to deal with situations within that experience of being the worker. Each subroutine will have its own subroutines to help the individual, help the entity, help you in dealing with variables within that experience. Now, the good news is that you can rewrite those personality aspects exactly the same way as you would rewrite a program. And we're going to get to that. All right? I got to take things a step at a time. Let's talk about how you created your personality aspects, because how can you uncreate something or how can you change something unless you know how you created it in the first place? All of us have started a new job at one point or another, and we can remember that point that we started it. What did you do? Think about this. When you started that job, the first thing you did was you looked around to see who the most successful person was, who the most popular person was, who was disliked the most. And you used them as a model. You observed them. And you said, oh, I'm going to do this. That worked. I'm going to do that. That worked. This was creating that worker aspect, that personality aspect for that particular job. When you were a child and you would watch television, you would have your heroes on television. You were using them as a model. Remember, a mold. Nothing is created in this reality without a mold for creating your own personality. Esoteric schools, ancient wisdom has taught that each personality aspect is an actual entity within itself. How strong or how much sway that personality aspect has over you is in direct proportion to how often you use it or how much you're into it. Remember, personality aspects are under the same concept of emotions. If I'm angry all the time, my awareness is in anger, which means anger is really strong. It'll come up in a blink. It doesn't even need your approval for it to come up. Same concept when it comes to personality aspects. This is why it's so important to really decide on what job that you're going to have. Consider 8 hours a day. You are in that personality aspect. That aspect is going to be the most charged. It's going to have the most power over your awareness. And those subroutines within that worker personality aspect will be your go-to subroutines. I hope I'm making sense on this, guys. Now, before I tell you how to master your personality aspects, how to control them, let's talk about how to change them. And that's done exactly the same way that you did when you were a child, that you still do to this day. When you were a child and you ran across a situation that you did not have a subroutine or a personality aspect for, let's even talk about subroutines. What did you do? Well, you left the situation confused, probably feeling bad, probably feeling inadequate. A lot of different emotions could have occurred. But what you did do for sure is that you imagined in your mind, you took an archetype, you took one of your heroes, one of your models, and you said to yourself, okay, if this person was in this situation, what would they do? And you imagined them doing it. You imagined yourself doing it the exact same way as your hero, or you imagine your hero would do it. Now, what a practitioner does is he says to himself, is this productive for me spiritually? Is this productive for the great work, the spiritual path, the way that I'm dealing with the situation? If I don't like it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reimagine that situation the way that I want it to turn out, the way that I want it. Now, all of us do this. We all do it. You just may not realize what you're doing. And what you're doing when you reimagine how to handle a situation or imagine how to handle a new situation, you are creating a subroutine for your personality aspect. Really, people, it's just that easy to rewrite your personality. It really, really is. Now, let's bring up the main point. Now, here's the big point. Keep moving up the tree here. Who's in charge of your personality aspects? Let's think about this. What was the first personality aspect that you created? What was it? Now, you're going to have to go way back to when you were a toddler, probably, and maybe even a little bit beyond. The first personality aspect that you created was the ego. And that was used to find out how to get what you want from your parents or caretaker or whoever was a majority figure in your life. You use that to discover what that person liked and what they didn't like, and how to use that to get what you wanted. That is the ego. It is the purpose of the ego, is to protect you and to get what you want. That is your first personality aspect. So, since it's your first, and it's really the basis of all of your other personality aspects, what's the strongest? Now, that's going to be the point of the next video. How to unthrone or dethrone that ego to where it is no longer in charge of your life, where you can be in charge of your life. Make sure to subscribe.